Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Isaiah. I'm a licensed professional counselor and this channel is Therapy Today. And what we are diving into today are TikToks about therapy and specifically about what therapists should not do. So some of these are clients telling a story about their therapist. Some of these are therapists sharing perspectives on stereotypes or behaviors that they've seen or interacted with that are definitely problematic when it comes to the therapy space. And I think this video is really important because we don't talk much about our therapy processes. We might tell a friend, hey, maybe you should see a counselor, or we might ask how their therapy is going, but we don't really get into the details of what our counselors are doing, how they are conducting their work, and so that leaves a bit of a gap for people to understand what they should really expect from the therapist. What is the standard of care? And so I think these TikToks are really valuable for being able to share some of that information so that people can know if they are being treated well by the therapist, if the therapist is doing something inappropriate, and especially not blaming themselves for the process going wrong, especially if their therapist was doing something unethical or unhelpful in the first place. So with that being said, the links for these TikToks will be in the description below if you want to check them out for yourselves. Please do like and subscribe, that helps the channel to grow, and let's dive into it.
3 red flags in therapists. Number 3 is excessive self-disclosure. Number 2 is forgetting important details of your life. And number 1 is violating confidentiality.
Okay, that one's really short and sweet. Let me scrub through that a little bit. Number 1, absolutely, yeah, breaking confidentiality is a huge no-no. The short explanation of what he's talking about, everything that you and your therapist talk about is considered confidential, and especially when it comes to protected health information, details including your name, address, identifying information, things like that, are definitely not to be shared, along with details of your case, with anybody except with your written permission, and for clients under 18 with your permission and your parents. The only exceptions to that rule are in cases of safety, if there's concerns about neglect, abuse, harm to self, or harm to others. In those cases, we have a responsibility to break confidentiality. But yes, in most normal cases, your counselor should not be sharing information about you to anybody else unless you have given written permission for that to occur. I want to go back to what he said about number 3, excessive self-disclosure. Yes, and I want to qualify that by saying that some self-disclosure is considered helpful in some circumstances. It has to be well thought through. You have to be able to articulate why you think that might be beneficial for the client to know more about yourself, to be sharing more of your personality and your personal story when it's supposed to be their time to discuss their story and to be learning more about themselves. But absolutely, anytime the focus of the session shifts over to the counselor instead of the client, there either needs to be a good reason for that to be happening or it shouldn't be happening at all. I will say about number 2, forgetting details of your life. Depending on your counselor's caseload, they're not going to be able to recall every single thing. I used to be able to, and as I've gotten older, as I've picked up more clients, as cases have become more complex, I feel like I'm asking clients to remind me when specific things happen if they had an exam coming up or if they had some kind of medical test coming up. I'm not always on top of exactly when those things are happening. I can't keep track of every client's timelines in my mind. But what's important is that I don't pretend. So I would say that it's not that forgetful therapists are unethical, but I can't play it off like I know, because that starts to center my comfort, my emotions, my sense of wanting to feel capable or look capable, and I'm pretending to know these things when I don't actually remember them, and that becomes harmful for the client if I start to play that off because I don't want to look bad. So I might say if your therapist is forgetting details about your life and also being defensive about it, that might be a problem. By itself, I'm sure it doesn't feel good if your therapist is not able to recall some certain things. I would encourage you to take that within the larger context of how you feel about that relationship and about that person. So let's go to the next one then.
I'm livid right now. My son is 13. Me and his dad are divorced. His dad was saying that he wanted to take him to some counseling. My son is a really good kid. He really is. He's really sweet. Him and his dad are having some issues because his father is not the easiest person to get along with. He's a tad bit controlling. So he brings my son to this child therapist. The therapist allows my ex-husband to come in the room for the first session, which I thought was weird.
I want to pause real quick. That by itself does not have to be a red flag. For most of my clients under 18, I think having family members involved in the process is immensely helpful for furthering their progress so that any changes they're trying to make don't go against the family culture and make them have to swim upstream to make positive changes for themselves. If the parents are on board along with the kid for making changes, that progresses counseling so much faster. That being said, I will always ask the client first, how do you feel about your parents being involved in the process? But then I'll be more careful about asking, okay, what do you feel comfortable with me sharing with your parents if and when they ask, or if and when I do talk to them? So it sounds like that conversation was not had with this first session, but let's keep going into the story and see what happens.
So I'm like, okay, maybe the second session he won't. So I tried to bring my son to the second session to basically make sure that my son could go in there and talk to this guy alone. But my ex-husband basically makes it a scenario. No, you can't bring him. So I asked my son today, oh, how did the session go yesterday? My son tells me that the therapist allowed my ex-husband in again, and then they were basically ganging up on him like, oh yeah, you need to listen to everything that your dad says, blah, 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 and you need to live your life in order like this way to be successful, whatever, whatever. And my son was like, well, that's not really how I live at my mom's house. My mom and, her boyfriend are successful. Listen to what this therapist said to my 13-year-old son.
First of all, and I understand I'm getting a biased review from the mom who is obviously divorced from the ex-husband, but this seems to be a co-parenting issue where philosophies of parenting are different, and this actually needs to be between the mom and the dad going to a counselor to work that out instead of having the son be in therapy.
He said, well, it's easy to sit on your ass and be successful when you're a rich dude from California. What did you say to my child?
I didn't know I would need to be censoring stuff on this channel, but here we are. Yeah, absolutely. Personal attacks like that are never appropriate coming from a therapist. That is absolutely unprofessional, and especially if you really never met or interacted with the mom before, you have no grounds to be saying anything like that. And, well, first of all, it's unprofessional. And then second, you're leaping to conclusions maybe based on what the ex-husband has said, which anytime I'm meeting with divorced parents, I always take what I hear about the other parent with a grain of salt.
Because, no. I can't process it. It's so unethical. I don't even have words for it. What kind of counselor talks to a 13-year-old like that? I don't know. I hate to do this to someone, but I feel like I just have to turn this guy into like the board. Apparently the other thing he said to my son was something about when him and his wife get in an argument, he just grabs her tit. What is wrong with this guy?
Probably a lot. She's absolutely right. Yes, you can report any counselor to the board if you believe they are acting unethically. But yes, a lot of times I hear this from clients who have had other therapists who just interject their own opinions, their own values and beliefs into the process. And while we are people, while we have our own beliefs, we have our own sets of values that may conflict with our clients' values, that should not affect how we are treating them. We should be using their values as a measuring stick in the counseling process. So absolutely, this is unethical. And she's right to report this counselor.
Choose your character.
Why did they stereotype the licenses also? Look, we have an MDiv LPZ, I think that is supposed to be, LCSW, and an LMFT. First of all, appreciate the music. For an early 90s baby, that really brings me back. But let's talk about some of these, okay? So the first one that we're talking about is probably like a biblical counselor or a Christian counselor, has the MDiv degree. A lot of seminaries do have counseling programs because that does figure into a pastor's role a lot of times. But sometimes what happens, and I wrestle with this with a movement called biblical counseling, which says the Bible has all the answers for your psychological and mental health needs. And that can definitely be problematic, especially when you're talking about maybe having a non-Christian go to see a Christian counselor. I don't know why you would in the first place, but maybe they're the only person around who offers those kinds of services. So absolutely, you talk about values not lining up, maybe imposing values, because especially if you're marketing yourself as a Christian counselor, you're coming in with a very specific mindset and understanding of what the problems are and how to fix them. And so this is not to say that Christian counselors cannot be good counselors, but just that you need to understand what you're getting yourself into if you are going to see one and what kinds of responses you might reasonably expect. This hurts. Did Dr. Rick Van Winkle retire already? It is really unfortunate how many clients and stories I've heard, therapists falling asleep during sessions. That is definitely problematic. I think if your therapist is falling asleep during your sessions, it's not your fault. I think it's very easy to start thinking like, oh, my story's boring, or it's not that important, or they just think I'm whining. Even if they do think those things, that should not impact how they are providing services to you. And so that is definitely worth a conversation if you have a counselor who's falling asleep during your sessions. The way too empathetic crybaby. There's a place, and this goes under self-disclosure, there's a place for my feelings as your therapist to play a part, because that informs how I can be empathetic, how I understand your experiences and try to see them through your lens. But I also have to understand that if I self-disclose too much in terms of my emotional content, that sidelines what you're going through and centers my experience instead. So that is absolutely not helpful either. Even if we might think it's compassion or like, oh, I just feel too much. That's something that we each find a balance with as professionals between our own feelings and our professionalism. And we need both to be able to be a really good therapist. And the private pay only snob. I hate that LMFTs got labeled under this because I think they all do some great work. So I don't know why, maybe that was just the last license left that they hadn't hit. To be fair, you know, this is America. However you choose to do your business, if you choose to take only private pay, that is completely up to you. I don't know how many clients you can reasonably expect only taking private pay, and you're talking about probably $100+ per session. So that gets pricey and it adds up quickly. So all I'd say is like, you better get results really quickly if you are going to a private pay only person.
Toxic therapist behaviors that are never okay. I've sadly experienced every single one of these and would never treat one of my clients like this. If you've had any of these experiences as a client, I'm so sorry, and I want you to hear that it is wrong. Therapists should never see a diagnosis instead of a whole person. Flirt and push romantic or sexual boundaries, raise the fee without notice or communication, take one partner's side in couples therapy, refuse to waive a late cancellation fee if it was a medical emergency, and lastly, this one is super obvious, but therapists should never ghost you. Therapy is a relational process where it should feel safe to discuss difficult topics from both sides. Transparency and repeated informed consent is essential. And the human connection, the part where we build trust, is the most important thing beyond diagnosis or treatment. If you have any bad therapy stories, let me know in the comments.
Okay. I'm not mad at anything that she pointed out. I think the captions weren't accurate for what she was saying. I think she was saying your therapist should never ghost you. But let's go through those point by point. Okay, never seeing a diagnosis instead of the person. Yeah, absolutely. A diagnosis might be part of an explanation for what's going on with somebody, but you cannot just say, oh, you're schizophrenic. I'm only gonna treat you like you're a schizophrenic. So yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about clients, it's very easy to say, oh, my anxious client, or my depressed client, or my bipolar client. And it's an easier way to talk, but I think over time that can shape the way that we think to this person is just this narrow view that we have of them. And so definitely try to keep a picture of the entire person in view is really important for therapists. Never pushing sexual boundaries is obvious, and I hope anyone who has ever experienced that was able to recognize right away that it's inappropriate. It's very easy for romantic feelings to develop in therapy because it is a very vulnerable process. It is a lot of emotional intimacy. So absolutely, if anything feels off about the way boundaries are set or not set in a counseling process, please feel free to bring that up and talk about it, and your counselor's response to that kind of conversation will be very telling. So about ghosting clients, I don't even know, honestly, how you ghost somebody. With the practice that I'm with, you know, our email addresses are out there. We have an office phone. And so there's a level of accountability with a group practice where you have an owner or an admin person who's getting those calls. And so if you're ghosting somebody, you're gonna hear about it from the other end. I can see in some private practices where people are just working for themselves that there might be less accountability there. On top of that too though, I feel like this is one of those situations where it's very easy for the client to feel guilty, like, oh, I made things awkward and it's my fault that we're not meeting now or that this person doesn't want to talk to me anymore. No, this is absolutely the professional's problem. They need to, like she's talking about, be able to have a relationship and be able to be transparent and communicate. And that is not on you as a client, but on them as a professional. All right, final clip here. We're talking about a bad therapy experience.
If you've ever had a bad experience with therapy, then watch this video. So I never make videos like this, but I came across a video today that really pulled at my heartstrings. This young woman said that her therapist had ghosted her when her therapist announced that she was so self-aware that there was really nothing that they could do anymore. And that is by far the craziest thing I've ever heard in 19 years being in the field. Having a high level of self-awareness does not mean that a person still does not need guidance, support, coping mechanisms, and just an overall supportive foundation for them to be the healthiest version of themselves.
I'll also add to that is a very deficit view of mental health. Basically, the attitude being that, okay, you start with an optimum level of mental health, and so mental health disorders or a lack of self-awareness, all of these things bring your mental health down. And so once you get back up to this level of self-awareness, then you're good. You don't need the counselor anymore. And so if they're coming from that view of mental health, I think it's limited, but understandable why they would say that. In my mind, mental health is not just about reaching this baseline level, but also being able to excel and grow and develop and become a better person. And I think this is where she's going with some of what she's talking about.
We can all be aware that we're self-sabotaging, that we're causing our own chaos, and that we're stuck in a rut. That's self-awareness. But that doesn't mean that we have the skills and the support and the tools necessary to get ourselves to a better place. I did not become a trained counselor for all the reasons most people think. You wanted to help people. You had the savior complex. Nope. I became a trained counselor because I had gone through so many counselors that could not help me as a young kid.
So that's important. What she's talking about is knowing leading to action. I have a lot of clients who can say exactly like what their triggers are, what their problematic patterns are, what are the things they're trying to change about themselves, but they still need work, they still need rehearsal, planning, bouncing ideas off of me, working through the counseling process to be able to come up with, okay, so how do I get myself to a better pattern? To have the encouragement throughout, even when they fail, even when they mess up, even when they go back to their old pattern, to be able to have that encouragement to keep working at it, keep improving. That's an invaluable part of the therapy process, and I think she's hitting that perfectly.
That I decided that it was game over, that I was going to teach myself, that I was going to put myself through all the training and I was going to find my way. Because I was tired of telling my story over and over to people who were underqualified and just didn't care. So I told myself that I was going to become exactly what I needed, and that is what I have done. I want people to understand, whether you're in therapy or not in therapy, and whether you're the professional or you're the client, that it takes a lot of guts and courage and bravery and vulnerability to share your story with a stranger.
I never want to discount that. She's absolutely right. And tooting her own horn a little bit, I will say I've been in therapy before, I've been married. It's not easy sharing your emotions, and it is not an act of cowardice, it's an act of bravery to be able to share the most vulnerable parts of yourself with a stranger. Yeah, there are some times when I'll reflect back to a client at the end of the intake session, thank you for sharing this with me, even though you've only known me for about 45 minutes. That is courageous, and that's a brave thing to do.
To go over it repeatedly and pour your heart out and tell someone your deepest, darkest secrets. And for them to tell you that because you're aware of it, that there's nothing more that they can do for you, only makes you feel worse about your situation.
I'll add on to that too, that therapists, I think, because of this savior complex that she talked about before, some people go into the field because of that, and that's absolutely a very passionate thing that can be very beneficial for people. But if we fall into this trap of I have to have an answer, I have to have a solution for you, when we feel stuck or we can't think of something because we're just humans also and we have our own problematic patterns, if we can't come up with a solution, then we might start telling our clients, oh, I can't do anything else for you. But sometimes the most important thing that we can do for a client is to connect, to be with them in their scary feelings and their overwhelming situations. I can't do this journey for them, but I can be with them, alongside them in that journey.
Only makes you feel more helpless and hopeless and stuck. If you've had a bad experience with therapy, understand that it's just an experience and it will not dictate your healing journey, and that there is someone out there who is educated, qualified, and ready to ask the questions to help you get to the exact place that you need to be so that you can take that deep cleansing breath. Don't let one or two difficult, challenging experiences dictate and define your healing journey. Everything that you need to heal is inside of you, and a qualified person is going to be able to ask you the questions to pull it up. Trust yourself, follow your intuition, and don't stop at nothing until you get exactly what you deserve, because you're worthy of healing and you're worthy of support. And to that young girl that made the video, I couldn't stitch it, but I'm here. My inbox is open, and you're never alone. We're always alone together.
Generally, I agree with everything that she's saying. The only thing that I would add is that there are some people in situations where there are few counselors around and you have limited options to shop for somebody who really fits what you need. But it's important to recognize that some people do not live in metropolitan areas. Some people don't have the luxury of choice. And so that's a question that I turn over in my head sometimes. What do you do? Are you supposed to just stick with them and hope something helps in that process? Or do you just quit entirely? I don't know the answer to that, but that is something that therapists need to be aware of and cognizant of. If they're the only therapist for miles around, you hold a great responsibility in that area to the people who would reasonably come to see you. So yeah, like I said, some of these TikToks are really discouraging to hear that some therapists will interject their opinions, excessively self-disclose, unethically treat their clients. But I am encouraged that TikTok or YouTube or whatever social media platform you enjoy offers this place for people to be able to share their stories, for therapists to be able to share what's appropriate and not appropriate, just like I'm doing now, so that people can have a better understanding of, hey, if this is happening in my therapy process, something needs to change. Maybe I need to change therapists, maybe I need to have a conversation with them. And it shouldn't fall on the client to have those conversations. But again, this is about educating everyone who uses mental health resources to know this is the standard of care, this is what you should expect. And if your therapist is not up to par for that, then something needs to change. So again, I appreciate you all watching this video. Please do like and subscribe. That helps the channel to grow so we can do more videos like this so that we can educate and advocate for better mental health overall. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you all next time.